My 9-year-old daughter, Abby, has had a weird fear of the mythical creatures for a while now. And I blame her mother, my ex, for giving her unrestricted access to the internet at a young age. I began to grow tired of constantly having to check under her bed and in her wardrobe for monsters every time she stayed at my house for the weekend, and even had to invest in a nightlight to help her sleep. When she was younger, I was understanding. Lots of kids are afraid of the dark and things that go bump in the night. But as the years went on, this started to irritate me. It had gotten to the point where she didn't want to go to sleep by herself, couldn't sleep in the dark, and absolutely refused to step outside at night. 2 weeks ago, Abby and I fell out because she point blank refused to take the trash out after dinner because it was dark. This led to me growing frustrated. Now she only had to take 5 steps out the door, but she dug her heels in. During that week, I decided enough was enough and planned to take her camping in the forest for the weekend to get her away from all the nonsense online and face her fears. I ordered Abby some walking shoes, hiking trousers, a thermal jumper, and some cheap t-shirts to pack for our weekend. Abby basically has an entire wardrobe of clothes she keeps here, but I didn't want her to complain if she got her clothes dirty or damaged. And I left work a bit early on Friday to prepare, packing a bag for myself and my daughter. And I loaded up the car and made my way to my ex's house to collect Abby. She greeted me at the door, and I held out a carrier bag full of hiking clothes. "Hey, you, go put these on," I smiled, handing her the bag. "What is it?" she asked, peeking into the bag. "It's walking gear. We're going on an adventure." As Abby ran upstairs to get changed, my ex, Martha, sauntered to the door, her new partner, Steve, following behind. "Hello, Paul. I hope you're well." Martha smiled half-heartedly, with Steve offering me a nod of hello. We engaged in pleasantries for a while, when Martha asked what our plans were for the weekend. "We're going camping," I tell her in a low voice, under the guise of a brisk hike. "Oh, Paul, no." Martha frowned, shaking her head. "You know what she's like in the dark." Leave 'em be, Marth," Steve chimed in, giving me a nod of approval. "It'll do the girl some good. My father would have done the same thing." Martha pursed her lips, as if thinking of a counter-argument before her shoulders dropped in defeat. "Well, I guess. Just look after her." "She'll be all right," Steve assured her before I could respond. Rubbing her shoulders, Abby returned to the door not long after. "How's it fit?" I asked her. "Well, the shoes fit fine," she replied, lifting her foot up out in front of her. "But the trousers are a little long, and the fleece is kind of big." And she wasn't wrong, but I wrote it down as the unpredictability of online shopping. "Looks all right to me," Steve said, giving me a final nod farewell, before my daughter and I retreated to the car. "Dad, this hike is taking ages," Abby whined, her arms swinging by her side. "It's only been a couple of hours. Usually you're full of energy." We carried on walking until we reached a large clearing. "This will do," I announced, sliding the backpack from my shoulders. Abby looked at me, perplexed. "For what?" And I smiled as I said, "The campsite, Abby." Her eyes widened. "What?" she snapped. "Tell me you're joking." "Oh, don't be dramatic. Didn't you catch on when I got this huge bag out of the car?" And Abby began to panic, explaining to me how it will be dark soon, and we need to leave. "Hey, now, calm down. We won't make it back to the car before dark. Let's set up camp and we'll get a big fire going. I even brought marshmallows." The tent was up. Baked beans and hot dogs were eaten, and we sat around the campfire with marshmallows on sticks. And see, this isn't so bad. Isn't it nice to be away from the screens and pollution? I guess. "You want a drink?" I asked, pulling up 2 cans of sugary soda from my bag. Abby raised an eyebrow. After 7? You and Mom never let me have soda after 7. Yeah, I guess you're right. And I thought you might want one as a treat, but like you said. No! Abby playfully yelled as I pretended to put the sodas away. I handed her a can, and we both resumed our places at opposite ends of the fire, our sodas letting out a hiss as we pulled back the tabs. So, how come you're so scared of the dark? I asked her, pulling a packet of cigarettes from my pocket and lighting one. Abby ran her finger around the rim of the can. You know why. Monsters, I replied, not looking up. Do you believe in monsters? And I shook my head. Nah, well, I mean, I don't believe in the kind of monsters you do, with claws and horns. I do believe some bad people can be monsters, though. And I don't believe in those kinds of things, Abby told me. And this had my attention. With a raised eyebrow, I asked, So, what sorts do you believe in? She looked down at her can again, prodding the tab with her finger. Have you ever heard of the hermits? The what? And I asked, a slight chuckle escaping my lips. The hermits, my daughter repeated. Can't say that I have. Abby pulled her phone from her bag, opening a folder in her photo gallery, and handed me the phone. I put my can down next to me and began flicking through. The first image was a drawing of a humanoid creature, but its ears were slightly pointed, and its eyes were pale white, with pupils like a snake. It had locks of thin, white, greasy hair. It looked as though its nose had been removed, and it was drawn wearing only a white shred of cloth around its groin. The second was a realistic-looking image, similar to the drawing. It had long, sharp fingernails, and was grinning with pointy yellow teeth. And it was thin and seemed to hunch over, with grayish skin and a hairless body. This image didn't show it wearing the shredded cloth. Instead, it appeared to have a small, bulging pouch, I guess similar to a kangaroo, where a human would have their, reproductive parts. And I scrolled to the next image, which was mostly text with 2 different sketches of the creature. One looked more male, the other more female, with a slightly fattier chest, a pouch that went sideways, and a more flexible, hunched-over stance. And I flicked my finger across the screen to the next image, which showed local statistics of missing children and hikers who vanished without a trace, with some locations and images of the victims. And what followed this image was a screenshot of written text. The hermits generally reside in wood and farmland, where they can easily acquire food. And the hermit's usual food source is the bone marrow of larger animals, such as cattle, horses, deer, and humans. The hermits are attracted to the smell of blood. Some say they can smell it from up to a mile away, although this hasn't been proven yet. Hermits are social predators, which follow similar pack rankings as we give wolves. They don't tend to follow usual gender roles, with both males and females engaging in similar activities, and ranks for both sexes. And I continued flicking through the album, which showed more sketches, pictures, and grainy camera footage. They are pretty creepy, I admitted. But they're not real. There's been all kinds of folklore around since I was a kid. It used to scare me a bit too, but it's just make-believe. Abby frowned at me as I handed her phone back. It's not fake, Dad. I've seen them. They roam the woods at the back of the house. I chuckled. Is that so? As I moved my arm, a pointy branch from the log I was sitting on snagged the sleeve of my fleece, pulling some of the thread out. Damn it, I hissed, raising my arm to inspect the damage. Abby suddenly jumped up. Did you cut yourself? No, I just got my fleece caught on the stick. Abby went into a tirade about checking my arm for cuts to ensure it's not bleeding. They can smell blood. They target the wounded for an easy kill. And I looked at her and sighed. Kid, let's just get ready for bed. And I turned in my sleeping bag trying to get comfortable. The dim yellow beam from the flashlight which Abby had insisted we hang from the roof, was all that illuminated our shelter. And I was about to drift off when I felt my shoulder being poked. "Dad, I need to use the bathroom." And I turned and sat up in my warm sleeping bag. "Okay, go ahead and take the light. Just don't go far." "Can you come with me?" Abby asked awkwardly. "You're plenty old enough to do these things by yourself," I told her, already unzipping my sleeping bag, knowing my fate was sealed. And I grabbed the flashlight and climbed out of the tent, aiming the light at a large tree. "Here, you take the light. Just go behind that tree over there." And I turned around and took a deep, tired breath, feeling the crisp air caress my face. My daughter returned, her face pale. "Dad, something's wrong." "What's wrong, sweetie?" "And I think I'm bleeding." "What? Where? Did you get a scratch?" "And I have a first aid kit and..." Abby cut me off by pointing to her lap. "I'm bleeding here." She looked at me visibly upset and uncomfortable, and it took me a moment before it clicked. No, don't worry, sweetie. It's normal. That's just something you get at a certain age. But what a place for it to happen." And I retreated back to the tent and tried to find something to help my daughter. "Did your mom pack any, toiletries in your weekend bag?" And I called out to her, dragging my bag out of the tent. Abby shook her head, her eyes beginning to water. "Hey, sweetie, it's okay. It's all right. Don't get upset about it," and I assured her gently. "I've got a load of tissues and some bandages. That should see you through until we leave. Here, go in the tent and get changed into some clean undies. Now I'll wait outside." Abby vanished into the tent as I took some deep breaths, hoping that I handled the situation okay. She came out of the tent a few moments later, and "I left my weekend bag in the car," she informed me sadly. It'll be okay, sweetie. And I'll wash everything tomorrow while you have a nice bath." Abby offered me a half-hearted smile before her face fell. "They'll smell it." "Huh? What are you talking about?" "The hermits." "Oh, no, they won't smell it. Now let's try to get some sleep." And a couple hours later, I was awoken by a scream. I sat upright, looking in the darkness at my daughter's sleeping bag. And it was empty. And I fought my way out of my sleeping bag and dove out of the open tent. "Abby! Abby!" I shouted, looking around everywhere. And I spotted the beam of a flashlight coming from behind the large tree Abby had used earlier. "Abby, are you okay?" I asked as I ran over. Abby didn't reply, her shaking hand pointing at the tree line. And I slowly took the flashlight from her trembling palm, rubbing her shoulders reassuringly. "What happened, sweetie?" I dropped my bracelet earlier. I didn't want to wake you, so I thought I'd be brave and go get it." And it should be noted that Abby's voice shook with fear as she pinched her bracelet between her fingers tightly. "Well, why'd you scream, sweetie? Did something scare you?" I asked, gently taking the bracelet from her fingers and putting it in my pocket. And I expected her to say that she heard a twig snap, or an animal. Abby slowly pointed in front of us. "It's behind that tree." Confused, I raised the light to where she was pointing, just in time to see a figure step backwards out of sight. "What the hell?" I said out loud, and a mixture of fear and anger in my voice. Before I could think, I called out into the night, demanding to know who was there. Abby clung onto my waist as we stood frozen in place. And Daddy, before Abby could say anything, a large branch snapping behind us caused us to spin around. And I shone the light in all directions, unable to see anything. And a screech rang out from the trees, and as we heard twigs snap all around us. "Let's go back to the tent," I whispered. Looking back, I felt the shiver of what was a false sense of security, but I knew I had a small survival knife in my bag. We walked slowly backwards towards the tent,
small embers of fire offering the campsite a hint of light. My daughter began walking backwards to the tent when I grabbed her arm. A filthy, gray foot slowly disappeared into our tent. Abby gasped, unable to scream due to the fear, and time stood still, and I could hear my heart thumping in my ears as I held my breath. The crunching sound of a stick behind us was enough to break me from my terrified trance. "Run," I hissed, practically dragging my daughter by her arm through the bush and the tree line. Screeching rang out behind us, but I didn't look back, and I could hear heavy rustling behind us. "Daddy, they're in the trees," Abigail screamed. "Just keep running." My eyes locked in front of us. My hand latched tightly to her arm as I pulled her along. Abby tripped, causing my body to jerk and the flashlight to escape my grip. I pulled her back up in a second, and we continued fleeing, not wasting any time to pick up our only source of light. I desperately pleaded that this route would lead us back to the car, or at bare least out of danger. But my stomach dropped, and I put my foot in front of me to hastily decelerate. The steep edges of a deep ravine, lit up by the moonlight, trapped us. "Damn," I hissed, rapidly turning my head back in the direction before deciding to continue right. "Daddy," Abby cried as I began to tug her, pointing to where I was pulling her. I looked, and a long, gray, bony hand with sharp black fingernails slowly disappeared behind a tree in front of us. I stopped, pushing Abby behind me in a protective stance. Branches broke all around us as screeches took over the forest. My daughter gripped my hand as figures began to slowly peer at us from behind the trees, their long, thin white hair dangling down, illuminated by the moonlight, and their eyes reflecting like an animal. A low, rumbling snarl from behind us seemed to silence the forest, and I turned my head to see a hunched creature hunting us on all fours, its back low to the ground. And it got closer. Then it stood on 2 feet and sniffed the air, before looking at my daughter and letting out a gurgling grin. Sharp, yellow teeth filled its mouth. And I pushed Abby back behind me, encasing her between my body and a tree. "Get back!" I yelled, holding my shoulders high. And the creature looked at me, its slit pupils growing slightly as it slowly crept into the moonlight. Abigail screamed. I turned around to see a long gray arm latched onto my daughter's waist, trying to pull her up the tree. And I began punching, clawing, and twisting the arm, desperately trying to pry it from my daughter. And I suddenly felt a heavy impact on my back, and I began falling. The creature in the moonlight had hit me so hard I'd been thrown into the ravine. My body bashed against the rocky edges of the ravine as I rolled to the muddy edges and into an ankle-deep stream below. I tripped on the rocks as I fought hard to stand, a sharp pain in my foot as I twisted it falling. The screams of my daughter rang out from above, and I desperately clawed at the edges of the ravine, grabbing at roots and rocks to climb back up. But I couldn't. "Abigail!" I screamed helplessly, scraping my fingernails across the rocks and frantically seeking for somewhere to climb. The trees rustled and the branches croaked from above me, the screeches of the creatures and my daughter's cries beginning to grow faint. And I walked through the ravine until morning light, when I found a spot I could climb. Dazed, and I blinked into the sunrise, and I continued briskly limping until I got to my car, plucking my keys from my fleece pocket and collapsing in the driver's seat. And I punched the steering wheel, tears welling up in my eyes as I turned the keys in the ignition and began speeding towards town. And I filed a police report. The police didn't believe me at first, but eventually confessed they had had a lot of strange reports from that woods. And they believe it's a group of sick individuals in costumes targeting hikers and campers, even though I insisted that it was impossible. No trace of Abby has been found. I live in hope that she got away somehow and will someday come back. Our campsite was discovered torn to shreds. The police did a thorough search through the forest and found skeletal remains of some of the missing hikers. The bones had been snapped and were riddled with teeth marks. Police think that an animal got to them. Martha blames me, of course, and has since demanded no contact. I can't say I blame her. I couldn't keep our daughter safe, and I live with the guilt of that every day. And I wish I could go back in time and just stay home that weekend. And this story doesn't end with me hearing things in the night or seeing faces in my windows. I haven't been to a woods since, and I keep my house well lit at all times. Abby, if you're out there, and if you read this, I'm so sorry that I couldn't protect you. You were my reason to get up every morning and push me through the week, and my reason to smile. Life isn't as bright without you. And I've still got your bracelet, and I keep it on my nightstand, so it's the first thing I see when I wake up, and the last before I go to sleep. Please, Abby, come back, because I'm scared of cryptids too.